years after the civil rights movement, that it's out there, and how angry people are, and how it's good to know, and we have to figure out. I mean, I think that's one of our responsibilities, is how do we address, these are people who are angry and who have these kind of racist thoughts. Where is that coming from, and how do we become a civil society again, and try and get, or how do we get there in the first place? I guess we're still striving for that.
And real quick, I want to, because I don't think it's a mystery of where this is coming from,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna play 5-second historian, so watch Heather's face as it gets horrified. But when, the clip of Hillary Clinton where she says, this has been at the fringe but never been mainstream, that is a convenient story that especially the left likes to tell itself about this country.
Mm-hmm.
And the what flaw in American society is, to use a biblical metaphor, it's our original sin. And that is, as a nation, from our founding, we decided that black people could be owned, that they could be property. And even after the Civil War, we endured Jim Crow. Even after civil rights, there is systemic racism, the legacy of redlining, a lack of economic opportunities, the marginalization of Latino and Latina cultures that play into that. And more groups just get to be counted as white so that the demographics stay stable, and we continue to engage in that othering rhetoric. And so mainstream white supremacy is, from our political leaders, is not novel and it's not new. And it is because we just decide not to deal with race. I mean, the quotation from Richard Spencer about, well, after the Civil War, we truly became a European nation. What are you talking about, right? After the Civil War, we decided that people of color no longer are property, so then we found other ways to discriminate against them. That's not Europeanization, right? That is continued white supremacy and ignoring their contributions to the fabric of American society. And so it's just so frustrating to have that kind of whitewashing. And until we deal with that, that's the flaw.
No, your history is spot on. And I would add to this is what I have come to understand after studying the history of race in America for however many decades I have. The truth, as I see it, about the history of race is that it's not that the United States has become progressively more enlightened and more in touch with the humanity of all of its people and has abandoned its white supremacy. The history of ebbs and flows of race and racism in America are the willingness of Americans who have the privilege to do so to pull on those threads of racial suspicion, racial hatred, and racial subordination for their own political convenience. And in times where, late 60s, there's a moment where suddenly it is no longer worthwhile for whites who have the privilege to invoke race in that way to do it. But now, in another period of distress, all of that architecture is right there. And it's just, is someone going to take that and pull the thread? And you know what? Donald Trump, and I agree, he is not a member of the alt-right, although Richard Spencer said whether he likes it or not, he is our president. And I've never heard Donald Trump refute that or distance himself from that. But the fact is he was the candidate. He was the one who stood on, of all the candidates on the Republican Party platform in the debates, he was the one who was willing to pick it up and use it, and it works. That is the reality of race in America.
All right, so in interest of time, I saw 3 hands that have been waiting. So I have your hand and yours, as well as you in the Platts car. So if you wanted to each ask your question, and then we can sort of work on those 3 questions to round us out. That way you've been heard. So go ahead and start with the first.
I just wanted to say, when Dr. McKendry said that the alt-right is not a part of the Republican Party, I realize that. However, with them, what they say and what they do is making them push into that. So this president looks alt-right to me. And what you said about the female is still not equal to the man and so forth. The elderly Republicans that I know, friends and stuff, they still want to go back to the good old days. What does that mean? Where the woman's home and not bringing coffee and having dinner ready. So even the good Republicans are still pulling up some of these hateful things of the alt-right. And that's a big fear. We don't need the Republican Party to turn radicalized.
No, I think you're exactly right.
We'll get your question and then you can ask yours and then they can address both. Go ahead.
All right, so the common theme for this platform, I feel like, well, one of the themes was words are extremely important. And as I was trying to spread news about this panel, all I had to do was say the words alt-right, and that's when I could see like the alarm bells going off in people's heads, and that's when I knew that I just lost them completely, and their response was, well, I don't want to be too political. So ever since Trump was elected, it's almost as if the norm has shifted from speaking out against racism and sexism and every other ism to it's slowly starting to shift more towards staying quiet, and that seems to be becoming the norm. So how do we address this, especially on campus, and is it even possible?
Excellent question, and then we'll.
Yeah, I have a question along the same lines of dialogue in that I like this idea of truths. I think there are, in terms of historical events, like, yes, the Holocaust happened, that is a truth, but I also think that individuals have a set of truths that they believe to be true. So I believe all humans are equal no matter race, gender, sexuality, etc. Whereas the alt-right then has their set of truths that they think no matter what, no one will be able to impede. So how do we engage in dialogue when I know I'm right and they know that they're right? Like, how do we achieve this solidarity that we are supposedly all working for?
Yeah.
We'll turn to you. You have 10 minutes, so hopefully we can squeeze another question in at the end.
Well, these are really good questions, and as you were speaking, my first thought was, for everything that I've said about truth, there is a grain of something. No one can be as committed as they are to an alt-right position if there is not something in there where someone has experienced some loss. So to at the very least try to understand what the loss is and meet someone there. I mean, for me, that's something I can listen to. But then, Marissa, your question about how do we talk about this, I think we have to talk about it. I think this is probably not the time right now to be so polite about our discomfort with issues of race, gender, sexuality, and class. That's why I guess I'm okay, coming to a panel and introducing myself as concerned citizen, historian, or psychopathic feminist bitch, however you see it. Because the words do have power, and I think we also have to get them out there and use them, and really have those uncomfortable discussions.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. Just kind of going off like the question of dialogue and talking to each other, I think that's something that is really hard, and that's been hard for me to do with this past election, is to be prepared to lose your friends, because we have to critically look at ourselves and understand like what is important to us. Like, for example, I don't know if any of you guys have heard about the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, their fraternity Phi Gamma Delta, or Fiji, harassing women at the Women's March. One of my very best friends is an active member of Phi Gamma Delta at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and he just doesn't think that that's a problem, and I just don't really think that I can be his friend anymore. And I think that that's something that's really hard in this election with things like the Trump presidency and the alt-right, is it moves beyond political affiliation, and it can have roots that go into every single facet of your life, whether it's like your race or your gender or your sexuality. And I think that if you can't have a dialogue with people, or if they're going to shut you out, then that's you can try it as much as you want, but also you have to kind of understand who you're talking to and what you're saying, Yeah.
Yeah, my comments are along the same lines. I think it's about time our campus became politically active, because I'm a junior, I've been here for a couple years, and I've always been passionate about the issues that I care about, but it just seems to me that no one else cares. But a lot of students I see are pretty complacent in that this is how my parents raised me to believe, and I guess I'm this because my parents are this, right? That's not belief, that's just not believing anything, And I think it's interesting that you see the trend of being polite and quiet. I wonder if that's really related to being very Midwestern and being like, don't want to offend you, but and I'm really sick of that. And now is not the time to be cute and nice to people who are perpetuating racism and sexism. But another side of that is practice self-care in which battles you engage with. There's a lot of times I'm a business student, I'm an econ student, and our econ department is quite conservative. And I've had professors who have said not very appropriate things, and there's times when I'm really mad and I'm going to be the psychopathic bitch and talk about it, right? And there's other times where I don't have the energy to do that. And you don't have to feel like you have to have the energy to do it all the damn time, right? But as an overall message, and kind of like taking a continuation of the Women's March, like we can't just post the Facebook statuses and do those things and be like, done, like, did my activism, right? Like, we have to keep on continuing to work if we find that these things, the ideas perpetuated by the alt-right are going to be problems. We're going to have to be prepared to lose friends, right? Like, I encountered a couple of my close friends who voted for a candidate that it's pretty clear I'm pretty anti-Trump, but like, voted for Trump. And I'm like, how do I want to engage in those friendships in a healthy way that's for both of us, but also is cognizant of my feelings, right? So as a whole, I think it's important to engage in those dialogues when you can, but don't feel the pressure to do it all the time.
I worry that I worry about people who have this kind of sense of self, and I get this sometimes too, of saying, well, my voice doesn't matter, or I don't have anything to contribute. And I don't know if I should feel bad about saying this or not, but staying quiet is staying complacent. And so when you encounter people who are pushing away and avoiding the conversation, I think it's our job to find folks who are allied with us to join with us and to speak out. And that means crossing partisan divides, that means crossing friend groups, that means bridging out. So when you see, folks advocating this kind of rhetoric, turn to your friends who are moderates, turn to your friends who are conservative, turn to your friends who are liberal, right? Depending on whatever your position is, and be direct. Is this what you really believe? And if, and when they start to hem and haw about no, well not, and it makes me uncomfortable, then offer the hand, right? Give them the opportunity to join their voice to yours. And I think in particular with this idea of, so I was really struck by this phrase of the good old days, right?
Yeah.
When you hear folks talk, wistfully about the good old days, we need to remind them, are those the good old days where people were property? Are those the good old days where we shocked people to change their sex? Oh wait, we still do that. Are those the good old days where we lynched people? Are those the good old days where we just turned away from the notion of our common humanity? And as you start moving through, I think, those areas, again, it's an opportunity for bridge and connection. Well, no, I don't really mean that. Well, then you don't really want the good old days. That's not what you're interested in. It sounds good, it sounds persuasive, but I'll shut up after this, I'm sorry. The ancient Greeks talk about nostalgia as a sickness. It is a painful longing for a past that never existed. And this idea of the good old days, of white supremacy, a lot of it, and even sometimes liberalism, engages in this nostalgia for an America that never existed, that was never kind, that was never genteel. And when we break the fiction of that version of the past, we can bring people into vocally talking about how we can confront white supremacy, and we have to do it. And that's how we create dialogue.
Thank you. I'm gonna have one more question, and we've been making eye contact, and then this will be the last question for the day.
So I may have already touched on this, but I've heard arguments that for white communities that don't associate with the alt-right sought comfort in Trump's rhetoric because they felt attacked by the left for being racist or homophobic or whatever. And so what is the weakness in that argument, if there is one, and to what extent could the alt-right possibly take advantage of these communities? Or in other terms, convince them to believe these alt-right white supremacist ideals?
Good final question.
No, it's a good final question, and I'm just sort of thinking about how I would formulate an answer. I mean, first of all, I think that some of that has already happened, actually, right? So the idea of people saying I'm voting or supporting just on the basis of this person sounded like he was talking to me, and a lot of that he was talking to me was some of this, you know, we're going to build a wall, we're going to, I mean, it's not alt-right, but it kind of speaks to those desires, right, of limiting immigration and creating an America that's for white people. So I think that, you know, one of the things to really think about when we're talking about action steps is also to look at where people have actually been left behind and have actually been ignored in this sort of attentiveness to certain issues over others. Because, you know, there are legitimate grievances out there as well. And frankly, in the US, we have this notion that we are a classless society, and we love to believe that, and we ignore the very salient realities of class at our own peril, to the peril of our own democracy.
I think it's interesting to, and it's important to look at the actual grievances that they have, but that can't be an excuse for their racist, sexist beliefs, right? Those two things are very separate, and it's important to look at maybe the economic or the social circumstances that has led them to be persuaded by those movements. But I don't have a lot of sympathy for like excusing that as racism, saying like, oh, it's the brown people that came here and took my jobs, right?
No.
Those aren't the same things. I think it's really important to examine those as different sides.
Right, because it's also not helpful for people, you know, scapegoating is a problem because it actually seeks solutions by harming people that actually have nothing to do. I mean, frankly, it wouldn't take much looking to see that the real source of most of those grievances are people very much like Donald Trump himself.
All right, well, let's give a round of applause to our Thank you all for coming. Hopefully we'll have a video if you want to revisit this this interesting panel, and please come up and ask questions if you'd like. Have a wonderful weekend.